Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. Welcome to part 2 of my meeting with a remarkable figure in the Jewish world, Tal Keinan, an American Jew who made Aliyah, became a hero as a jet pilot fighter for the IDF, went on to become one of the industry leaders in Israeli finance, and who's now written a beautiful and thoughtful book about the challenges facing world Jewry today, entitled God is in the Crowd. As I mentioned at the start of part 1 of our meeting, Tal's book is both marvelous and terrifying in its description of American Jewish life today, which Tal describes as, quote, dying in its sleep. Here is the second part of our meeting with Tal Keinan. I hope you enjoy it on L'Chaim.
So we have 3 fundamental visions that animate the notion of Jewish statehood today. And they should have been reconciled a long time ago. And there's still time to reconcile them, but they're not being reconciled for the time being. There's what I call the Secularist Vision, which I used to adhere to. I don't think it's adequate anymore. But essentially says Israel is just a refuge for Jewish people that is structured as a democracy, no more than that. That's the ambition. It's the Herzlian ambition for Israel. I don't think it's adequate, but there it is. There's what I call the Theocratic Vision, which had very few adherents at independence and now has 1 million and growing at a rate that they'll outpace us in a generation, or they'll be larger than we are in a generation. That is exactly what it sounds like, are aiming for a theocracy, and are using all the political power they have to impose that theocracy on the rest of Israelis.
I want to understand just the demographics here.
Mm-hmm.
I understand there's a growing number of fundamentalists in the state of Israel who believe Israel should be a Torah state,
yes,
which means a theocracy. They're an infinitesimal percentage of the Israeli people. They would have to be 6-fold, while the rest of the Israeli population would have to stop producing. So that for me, it's inconceivable. Do I think that they'll grow? Yes. Do I think they'll ever be a majority, or ever have control, or ever shape what
Mark,
Israel is?
Let me give you the numbers. Before we get into that, so there are two burdens of survival in the Middle East that we can't avoid. There's a military burden. We need to be strong militarily.
Correct.
The Middle East devours the weak. We have to be strong. And we have to be strong economically in order to support our military strength. It costs a lot to do this. About 20% of the Israeli tax base is accretive fiscally to the Israeli economy, meaning they pay in more than they take out. About 80% takes out more than it puts in, just like almost every capitalist democracy.
Exactly
yes,
right.
Like
you described everywhere.
Yes, every capitalist democracy. What's special about Israel is that entire 20% is composed of secularists. Right? Now, they might be religiously observant Jews, but their vision for Jewish statehood, right, is that's the same group that sends their kids to fight the wars. We have a small group that sends their kids to fight and is an economic drain. I call them the territorialists. We can leave them aside for now because I don't think that's the big issue. The theocrats do neither, and there are about 1 million of them now. And they're having 6.9 children per family. In first grade in Israel today, we're just hitting the threshold this year where there are more people who will not receive draft papers in 10 years than there are who will receive draft papers. I'm talking about non-Jews. There are Christians that are now enlisting. We call it Muslims and ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel. At some point, we need to realize that what we've done is we've created 3 separate states. We live in segregated communities. We don't know each other. We have separate education curricula. We're not part of the very rights and obligations of citizenship are different between us. We're not even in the same country. We're not part of the same enterprise. At some point, the relatively narrowing segment of the population that's bearing the twin burdens will say, we've had enough. We don't want this anymore. Why are we doing this? And I think it's already happening. And I try to get demographers to work with me. Let's put some numbers around this. Nobody wants to touch it. I understand why. I get it. But if you eyeball it and you look, we made a big, it was kind of a big celebratory year. You've got the year-end roundups of all sorts of, econometric statistics in Israel. So at the end of last year, I think, proclaimed 2018 as the best year of net aliyah, net immigration to Israel, since I think 1991, or when the big Russian immigration happened. I think it's 27,000 net that came. For a demographer to introduce some nuance here and understand that this is not a value judgment on people, but if we're talking about utility to the country in terms of the twin burdens of survival in the Middle East, can we not agree that the 85-year-old French retiree has a certain value, and it's great that she came to Israel? The intelligence officer with the degree from the Technion, who is about to sell this company for $100 million and is still serving in reserves at age 28, has more value just to that specific, right, to that specific metric. That's who's leaving. She's coming, she's leaving. And that's a problem. We need to face that. I think there are great answers to these questions, but we're not even posing the questions today. By the way, and I think once we pose them, we'll come up naturally with a great answer. They might not be mine. That's okay. But let's ask the questions there, which is, what are we doing here? What is Judaism? Right? What is this about? The first section of the book is called "Should There Be Jews?" Let's start with that. It's a brazen question. I understand that, and it takes some chutzpah to ask it honestly. But I do ask it honestly.
Do you ask it honestly?
Yes.
Because as I read the book, your answer was a resounding yes.
That is my answer. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard for me to take it seriously, the question.
So
when somebody already knows, you wrote this book knowing the answer was yes.
Knowing that my answer was yes.
You believe the answer is yes. You want the Jewish people to survive.
I do.
Yeah. Why?
So just to be clear, I ask that question a lot now on book talks. And I almost never get a negative answer in the United States. I do get it in Israel, which is interesting.
You get a negative answer to what question?
Should there be Jews?
You're telling me that in Israel, Israelis are saying, no, there shouldn't be Jews.
Yes.
In any significant number?
I don't know what significant is.
You do. No, you do. In any significant number?
Yeah, I do think it's significant, actually. I do. I think the notion that most of secularist Israel embraces, and this is secularist Israel, is that we're Israeli, not really Jewish. And I write about that, and I think it's an issue. I think it's not a sustainable identity. What does Israeli mean? What is the vision? If it's just to have a democracy, there are plenty of democracies in the world. We don't need another democracy. If you want normalcy, go to California. It's much more available in California than it is even in Tel Aviv, certainly in the rest of Israel. This has to be about something more if it's going to be sustainable.
And you believe it is about something more?
I do believe that, yes.
But you believe that most of Israelis cannot articulate it?
I think many Israelis have trouble articulating it. Many secularist Israelis reject it. If my brother's life course were available to them, they would grab it.
If that's true, in your mind, how does Israel survive? And when I mean Israel, I'm not talking about a geographical state. I'm talking about Israel as you and I understand it. Yeah. And if Israel became a theocracy, it would be a different animal. I'm talking about Israel as it exists today, as was the early Zionist vision. And there wasn't one Zionist vision, yeah, but all Zionist visions fell into a sort of Zionist philosophy.
Yeah. So I think here's a model. By the way, and I do think it's the same question. Whether it survives conceptually or physically, it's the same question. Because if you're honest about our neighborhood, you understand that a Haredi population that's
would
not
never survive.
Will die. It will be a traditional Jewish extinction, not the American kind. It'll be violent. Even our supposed allies in the Middle East have not reconciled themselves with the notion of Jewish sovereignty. the Egyptians are not happy with our existence in the Middle East. I don't know if they will be in the next generation. I don't know.
But they're not now.
They're definitely not now.
Jordan.
No.
No.
No, of course not.
Okay.
So I think it is ultimately the same question. So in essence, I think we need to look at Israel, we meaning global Jewry, as our asset. It's not just the Israelis' asset. And that means splitting our notion of Israel into two. It's something we've conflated historically in Israel. We've gotten away with it for a reason I'll explain. But we've got two missions. One is just to be a state, because that's the category we chose to organize around. We're a state, okay? We've got to deal with healthcare policy and fiscal policy, just like...
And there's no reason to apologize for that.
No, of course not.
Okay.
And I think we're organized for it, right? We have a parliament. It functions. We complain about how it functions, but we do that in the United States.
Everybody complains about their government. It's a big deal.
That's fine. It's working, right? Better or worse, it's working. We have a second mission, which is to be the nation state of the Jewish people. And we never had to really define exactly what that means. We didn't have to define it because the question was obscured by the fact that we needed a refuge first and foremost. In 1948, there were plenty of Jews in the world who were in trouble, in Iraq and in Morocco and in Egypt and in Poland and in Italy. And that was the case for 70 years. There were always Jews in trouble. There aren't any Jews in trouble today. Very few, maybe in Iran. If you want to leave France, you can leave. Most are not. Nobody's shutting the door. And so for the first time, we actually have to say, okay, so if the refuge is not really a necessity, at least temporarily it's not a necessity, what exactly are we doing here? What is this about? So now we actually do have to ask the question, which is great. I think it's high time. We should have done this a long time ago. What I propose in the book is actually splitting our government into two. Let's manage those two missions as distinct. They're interrelated for sure. They've got to be coordinated, but they're distinct. Everything that has to do with running a country, from defense policy to education policy, that is the province of the citizens of Israel, Jewish and non-Jewish. And that's functioning today. Again, we can improve it, but it's functioning. Everything that relates to Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, and there are three specific areas that I think are covered by that concept of nation state of the Jewish people, should be governed separately by all the Jews, and none of the non-Jews. Should have no jurisdiction over non-Jews. But that's identifying who is a Jew for purposes of full citizenship in Israel. What we have today is the law of return, which has a lot of consensus, but to be clear, the law of return is fashioned explicitly after the Nuremberg laws, where if you were Jewish enough for the Nazis, meaning one Jewish grandparent, you'd be Jewish enough for asylum in Israel. And it really is asylum. It's not full citizenship.
Why isn't it full citizenship?
Well, if you happen to have the right Jewish grandparent, it is full citizenship. That's true. If it's your paternal grandfather's Jewish, you're not a Jew as far as the government of Israel is concerned. That has some psychic implications that many people dismiss. I don't at all. I think they actually matter a lot. And the example I give in the book, which may be the most heart-wrenching, but certainly not the only one, is these Russian immigrants who were Jewish enough to fight and die for the nation state of the Jews, but not Jewish enough to be buried with their comrades in a Jewish cemetery.
Yes. You and I would find that outrageous, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think most Israelis do.
Yes. And it's only because at the moment a certain piece of Israeli life is under the control of the theocracy.
Yes.
Okay.
Right? The Jewish popes, as I call them.
So you're saying, by the way, I should have insisted you say.
Yeah.
You said there are three areas. One is?
The definition of who is a Jew.
Two. Okay. Number two?
Custody over the Jewish holy sites. Not Muslim holy sites. That should be the Religious Affairs Ministry. That as it's managed today. I think that's good.
You want that to be under the control of world Jewry, not
Jewry.
Israeli Jewry.
Correct. Correct. Who gets access to the Wailing Wall? How is that access governed? By the way, I don't have a prescription. It's very secondary to me what the answer is, but this is how we answer the question. And the third is the Jewish character of the state of Israel, which
Meaning
is
what?
So our bus is going to run on Shabbat or not going to run on Shabbat. What exactly is it that makes this the Jewish state?
You're arguing that Jews in Sacramento should have a vote as to whether buses run in Tel Aviv on Shabbat.
Yeah.
What's the logic?
Okay, so the logic of the first two is clear, right? That's
Easier.
Easier.
It's easier.
And by the way, and I agree that they're the most important. The third is tenuous. I understand that can be perceived as meddling. However, and this is much more popular in the United States than it is in Israel, as you can imagine. This whole discussion. If we don't have ownership in it, it's not ours. The only reason I can defend my right under the law of return is that I took Israeli citizenship. It wasn't really my right in that I couldn't, if the majority of Israelis vote tomorrow to end the law of return, it's over. And that's it. So you have no way to defend your right. It's not really yours. We do need to make it an enterprise of all of us. It is an asset that we all belong to. We can't just ask the Jewish community to write the checks and keep their mouths shut. That's not going to work. On the other hand, we can't ask, because our grandparents got on the right boat, for you to send your kid to the checkpoint.
I want, for those who are listening and might feel as I do, it's a little too facile to say it's about which boat they got on. Some had no choice, and some made very conscious decisions. They could have gone on either boat they wanted. They could have gone to Palestine and tried to run the British blockade,
Yep.
or they could have gone to Italy and waited and took a boat to America.
Yep.
And out of a certain kind of idealism and Jewish identity and a sense of history and wanting to return to Zion and Jerusalem, many people chose the boat to Palestine,
Sure.
knowing how difficult their life would be. And so it's not just like, okay, which line did you happen to get into?
Mark, I agree 100%.
Okay.
And had I been posed with that question at the wharf, I would have gotten on the boat to Palestine. I would have. It's animated my life. It's made all the difference for me, and it's all the meaning is there.
At some
it's
point,
not about.
At some point, you'll decide whether it's now or not. It's the piece that you haven't talked about yet. You have given a superb analysis of the complexity of Jewish life today and why it poses such a serious threat to the immediate future. It's much more real than global warming in terms of the future of the Jewish people. What you're describing is maybe a generation and a half away.
Mm-hmm.
But you haven't yet articulated for us why you would have gotten on the boat to Palestine,
Okay.
and why you don't want the green card to come to America, as much as you have a business here, and you live here as well, and you are American as well as Israeli,
Yep.
and what it is about Israel, for all the problems that you describe, that makes you love this and want it to continue. Right. I haven't heard that yet.
Okay, I'm glad you're drilling down on that, and I'm very proud to be American, and I love America, and I think it's the most wonderful political experiment in history.
And I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
And every Jew should understand what you just said.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Okay. And Israel is today meaningless to me without Judaism. It has to be about that.
Absolutely.
Okay, which is not something that one can take for granted in secular Israeli
Yes,
society.
and for many Israelis, it's not true.
That's right.
There is a absolute dichotomy, distinction in their mind between Judaism and Israel.
Yeah.
And some Israelis think that they are Israeli, not Jewish.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
you and I would want to see that merged,
Yes.
combined.
Why is it important that there be Jews? Now that we've agreed that Israel is just an asset in the Jewish toolkit, that's all it is. It's not an end, it's a means. Why should there be Jews? So I think we can answer that in two ways. One of the flaws in the book is I think I'm a little bit left brain on my, I give an analytical answer, or kind of a cerebral answer to that question. And it's important, and I'll get to it in a second. But let's be clear, there's an answer that comes from the Kishkis, which is maybe more important, certainly as important as that, in that we are a family. We're a family. We have instinctively gone to bat for each other forever. If you kind of look at what we take for granted, but I've had in interviews for the book, I speak to sociologists and historians who are impressed and somewhat perplexed by the lengths to which this Jewish community went to liberate Soviet Jewry in the 1970s and 80s, people they'd never met before. They'd been separated by generations from these people, and we put it all out on the line. Israeli Jewry absorbed over 1 million people when there were 4 million people in Israel, right? A quarter of the population, threw the pension system into immediate default, massive, massive economic and social burden. There were no protests. This was, of course, this is family. This is your home. That was obvious to all of us. We are a family. Let's not lose that. And there's no rationalizing about that. You either feel that or you don't. Which brings us to the second point, and the one that is much more communicable. Maybe that's why I made it into the book. Because I can't impart to my kids, I shouldn't say I can't, it's difficult to impart to kids that feeling of family. By the way, there is a way, I think, to do it. It's not 100%, but we should be doing it. I was missing it, which is Jewish ritual. I just didn't have it in my life, and it's important. But on the other side of that, and this is a point on crowd wisdom, there is a chain, an ethical chain, that began being formed, I would argue, 2,000 years ago. Many would argue 4,000 years ago, and it's fine. It's long enough ago. Of a people debating a set of ethical questions. And as you got better at debating, you went up to higher leagues, and you ended up debating people who were more proficient in different sides. And when you got to a high enough level, your views got recorded for posterity, and they were never erased. Not just the consensus views, but the dissenting views on everything. Hillel and Shammai, they both accorded equal respect, and they're both critical. We can circle back to what's American about that as well. But the fact that we have a record of the evolution of a crowd's sensibilities over millennia is a gift to humanity, not just to the Jewish people. By the way, it's not the only record, but it's its own record. And there's also a record of papal edicts that goes back, also valuable, fantastic. By the way, the Christians do a lot of things much better than we do. We get justice right, I think they get mercy right. And that's fine. We bring different things to the table. There's a place for all of us here.
I just want to go on record saying I disagree, but it's for later. Go ahead.
But if we take justice, justice is not a natural phenomenon. It's a human invention. And it could have been invented in many different ways. It has been invented in many different ways. Our notions of justice 100 years ago were significantly different from what they are today. And let's have the humility to assume that 100 years from now, they will have evolved considerably from where they are today. The fact that we have a record of our consensus view of what that word means, right? And we can track its evolution is hugely valuable to humanity, to the extent that I'm going back to the framers of our Constitution, who were very, very learned Old Testament scholars, most of them, and created a document that was very Talmudic in that it was written to be amended. It's much more about the questions than it is about the answers. And by the way, our process of amendment, when you get up to the high leagues in the Supreme Court, we record the consensus view and we record the dissenting view. And it's important. And precedent means a lot. We're not slaves to precedent when we're adjudicating ethical issues or legal issues, which should be a reflection of our ethics in this country. We're not a slave, but we certainly have to understand the trajectory that we're on, whatever it is that we're debating. That model in itself is a Jewish model. The record is fundamentally valuable to our sense of how we govern ourselves ethically. I'm thrilled to be a small link in that chain. I don't want to give it up. It's a privilege. I'd love to bequeath that privilege to my children. By the way, I'd love to have a process that if you want to join it, you can join it. You don't have to be born into it. I think that's a separate discussion that I think is important. But that is one fundamental reason that it's good that there are Jews in the world. We should have this thing. It's a good thing. Is it the end of the world if we disappear? I actually don't think so. But it's better if we're here.
Mm-hmm. And Israel.
So Israel is as a tool. So
What do you mean by a tool?
So
it sounds cold.
Right, I understand. Let's call it a means versus an end.
Yes, by the way, the state of Israel is not an end in and of itself. And some people make it that.
That's right.
Okay. And the state of Israel is not an abstract idea. It is human beings. It is flesh and blood. It is family. By the way, I'm thrilled that you say it that way. And I wish every Jew understood. Somebody says, what is a Jew? A Jew is a member of a family. Mm-hmm. And anybody can join the family, by the way. Anybody. It's easier to become a Jew than almost anything else. Anybody. And what's interesting about the Jews is once you're in the family, we'll never let you out.
Right.
You can think you're leaving,
right.
but the door never closes on you.
Right.
And it doesn't matter whether you're a believer, you're not a believer, you're secular, you're nuts, doesn't matter. You're part of family. And it's not just Russians that we saved.
Sure.
We went to Ethiopia.
Yeah, of course.
We went to Yemen. You know, and it's all about family. And it's not about religion, that's for sure. And it's certainly not about God. It's about family. And what you want to do is instill in every child, as you said, the sense that they have a responsibility and a link to every other member of their family. And it starts nuclear and it builds out. And ultimately you like to have a sense that you're part of the family of humanity. But your Jewish family is that's your ultimate family. And I'm going to just digress to what you said. You know, I don't know if I can impart that to my children. Well, maybe I can. And you said it's through ritual. You know, Judaism is for grown-ups. The Jewish home is for children. And what the Jewish home means is that a child is surrounded in warmth by Jewish symbolism and Jewish moments and Jewish ceremonies where mother, father, aunt, uncle, cousin, brother, they're all there. Everybody, and in some idyllic way, everybody puts their arms around each other and, you know, sings Shalom Aleichem and has a challah together.
I love that analogy. That's right. Yes, it's a different serving for adults than for children. I think that's great.
Yes.
I agree.
Okay. And so what I was saying to you is, when you talk about Israel as utilitarian, it sounds cold.
I understand.
My sense of you is Israel is not a cold thing for you.
Right.
It's a warm, it infuses warmth in you. Yeah. I want you to try to articulate what is that.
So first, it is family. It is family. And I would, you know, for 18 years was willing to sacrifice everything for family, and I'd do it today if they'd have me. I'd be right back, you know, doing it again.
Even though there were times that upset you.
Yeah, of course.
And you regret it.
It still upsets me. Yes.
Yes,
yeah.
But you do it again.
Yeah, absolutely, of course.
And you felt it was worth the sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Is it worth the sacrifice for your children?
Yes.
Okay, you understand, because that's a point you tried to make very clear to us, that what the American Jew doesn't always understand is, if you live in Israel, it's not just you. You're putting your children's lives on the line, and you're asking of them something that is really horrendous. You're asking them to be not in the army in some, again, theoretical sense. They carry a Uzi or whatever they carry because they may have to use it. Mm-hmm. And if they have to use it, they have to use it. If they're in a tank corps, they may be both shooting at and being shot at. Mm-hmm. And that's a life they live. And Israelis ought to feel this is worth it, or they should never do this to their children. Right. Do you agree?
Of course. Okay.
You're willing to do this to your children because?
Because I'm an optimist. And I
after all this, you're an optimist,
yeah,
Tal
definitely.
Keinan.
Let me say, look, it's never been easy for us, right? And we figure out a way. I think we'll figure it out now.
Yes, but wait, I read the book. I know you're an optimist, but keep going.
Yeah, I think this is something we will sort out. It is a new challenge. It's a new kind of threat, but it's also a huge opportunity. You know, to be clear, we've taken the mold off. The mold was anti-Semitism. That's what kept us Jewish. I am almost sure that I would not be here if not for anti-Semitism. By the way, even the mild, benign American anti-Semitism that kept my father had no no appreciation of Judaism at all, no knowledge of Judaism. I think his parents might have a little bit, I'm not sure, but also not much. Their parents probably did. So what an opportunity now that has been lifted, if you agree that it's been lifted, and I understand that's contentious, but if you do agree that it's been lifted, an opportunity to actually define ourselves in accordance with a vision, not be defined by somebody who hates us, which is something I reject. It's not a.
And I don't want to be a Jew because of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And that's every now and then Jews have assimilated. It's like they're going on a bit. You want Jews to disappear? Just be nice to us.
Right.
Okay. And then somebody says, okay, back in the ghetto, and if you do that to us, we gather together and we're very strong.
Right.
Be nice to us, and everybody wants to go their own way. But I don't want anti-Semitism to be what saves now the next generation or generations of Jews. Yeah. I want it to be this enormous embrace of I want it to be the enthusiasm for the Jewish embrace of life, which goes by the word Torah. It doesn't mean you have to be Orthodox, mm-hmm. but it does mean you have to understand that there is a worldview at the core of this Jewish family. And you put the family with that embrace of life, you have something extraordinary. And I want every child, woman, and man to be excited by it. And then I also want there to be a place where we as a community, as a family, try to live that out in a polity. That's called Israel. Either it works or it doesn't. And I agree with you, it should be for every Jew. The only thing that I think separates me a little bit from you is, as long as I'm in Manhattan or Stanford or Chicago, Boston, I want a connection to you. But I don't want to tell you what to do. And I don't know that I should have the vote that you want to give me.
You shouldn't have a vote on defense policy. You're right. You should not have a vote on healthcare policy. It doesn't affect you. You're right. However, if I want to continue claiming to be your nation state, which is what gives me all of my legitimacy, I have to make room for you in some way. And it's not going to be in healthcare. That's fine. We agree on that. But it is in what makes us the nation state of the Jews.
Okay, so you want there to be a third section at the Western Wall. I can come with my non-Orthodox friends.
My hope for Israeli Jewry is not any specific policy with regard to access to the wall or anything else. It's that we come together as part of one entity, yes. Which increasingly we are not. I think we're at a crisis. We're at a point where divorce is likely, and neither of us wins Correct. From that, right? So let's come together. It's going to require extending certain rights that we're maybe not comfortable extending. We're going to be giving up on some level of sovereignty in order to be the same people. We're increasingly not the same people.
It's a shame.
Right? It is a shame, but we could do something about it.
That's correct. So it's not just Israel you're worried about. You also talk about, again, American Jewry just going to sleep mm-hmm. and passing away.
Yeah.
And you point out it's not about necessarily anti-Semitism or somebody's coming with a gun or a hatchet. It's that life is so easy for the Jew here. He just drifts away. Mm-hmm. And you talk a lot about intermarriage. So I want to give you a moment, just now, Israel aside, you're also an American Jew. And you care about, I think you care about, it would be lovely for there to be, even if you say it's okay for the Jews to go out of business, mm-hmm. it would be lovely if the Jews did not go out of business in America. And yet, the intermarriage rate outside the Orthodox community has skyrocketed, over 70%. And Tal, I hope you understand, inside the Orthodox community, there's a new phenomenon. When I was young, no Orthodox Jew dated a non-Jew. Now they date all the time, and if they marry, the non-Jew converts. Yeah. That's a new model mm-hmm. inside the Orthodox community. So it's a pattern of larger American Jewish life. But I want to give you a chance, just speak for a moment about your sense of the challenge of intermarriage, and what do you say to it?
Okay. Back to competing imperatives, right? The individual happiness and communal survival. Competing imperatives. Intermarriage will end us if it continues at the rate and in the form that it's taking today. We can address both of those, though. First of all, the ambition shouldn't be zero intermarriage. It's fine. Well, there's always been apostasy. I don't know if you saw this new, the result of DNA testing, almost a quarter of Latin Americans have Jewish descent, almost a quarter. So there's been apostasy throughout. That's fine. That's 100% should not be the objective. But there's the kind of toast at a wedding where we say we're not losing a daughter, we're gaining a son. We could take a different approach to intermarriage. And I think I get this right in the book from a quantitative perspective, but there's a much more important qualitative point that I missed in the book. And it's been made to me by a bunch of grandmothers who I've met after book talks. And the story that I'm hearing, after the fourth or fifth time I started realizing there's something here, this is interesting, is I have all Jewish grandchildren, and I'm not an Orthodox Jew. So I've bucked the statistics in the United States completely. I married a convert. Had I married a man who was born Jewish, I'm almost sure this would not have been the outcome. So after a few times hearing that, I started thinking, what's going on here? What is this phenomenon? And I think the best way to explain it, and I could be wrong, but this is what it looks like to me, is I married a Jewish woman. We're both born Jewish. We never had to have a discussion of what that means to us. But when you say we're going to raise a Jewish family and raise Jewish children, you actually need to define what exactly does that mean. And that's an exercise that converts have to go through and the spouses of converts have to go through. They're doing exactly what I'm asking all of us to do in this book, which is to ask, what is this exactly? What is this enterprise? And most Jews in the United States and in Israel never ask that question. And that's why we're not leaving because we've examined the material and decided it's not for us. We were never even, the question was never posed. And that's what's happening today. And so first of all, I mean, there's a side point here that conversion, I think, is very much a good thing, right? It is increasing the average level of knowledge and commitment in Jewry. Most of us have very little knowledge of Judaism and almost no commitment to anything Jewish. Almost all the converts do have knowledge and do have some commitment. So that's a side point. I think the main point is it shows how important it is to pose that question. If we wanted to take this, and let's be clear, this notion of ethnic purity in Judaism is ridiculous. I mean, it's never been that way. We've always had permeable boundaries with our neighbors. We've always mixed, and it can be a useful tool for us, not just from a quantitative perspective, from a qualitative perspective. We should be welcoming that, but far more fundamentally, all that intermarriage is an event that poses the question and forces you to answer it. There are other ways we can pose it to people who are not intermarrying, and I think that is the critical piece. And I think that's fundamentally what I'm trying to do in the book, is ask that question.
Are you advocating intermarriage?
So what I will say, I don't do it in the book, but so I make the comparison to immigration and naturalization in the United States. So look, if we're going to look at conversion, here's an example of what a crowd wisdom generated rule could look like. I'm not saying this is the way we should do it, but here's kind of the level of specificity we're talking about. And I use, and it actually works very well for the grandmother piece as well. If you're born in the United States or you're born to an American parent, you're automatically American. That's the law. You're not required to know anything. You're not required to make any commitments to the United States, and it cannot be taken away from you. If you're not born American and you want to become American, you need to know something. You need to pass a knowledge test, know something about what makes this country what it is. You need to make a commitment. You need to live among us for a certain number of years. You need to take an oath of allegiance as a condition of your citizenship. You and I never had to do that. If you want to become American, though, you have to. Is it a stretch to argue that by virtue of having to clear these two bars of commitment and knowledge, that on average the immigrant American is a better American than the born American? I don't think it's a stretch at all. I think that's probably true. It certainly, surveys will tell you, a more grateful American. That's for sure. How do you measure better American is subjective, but I would argue that it probably is. By the same token, in Judaism, we are suffering from a crisis of knowledge and commitment. That is something that's happening today. I think it's strong enough to question the notion of turning away the convert 3 times, saying, you know what, let's set a bar. And it shouldn't be a low bar. It should be a high bar, but not a bar that's set and reset every day by 2 men in Israel. That can't be the way we do this. We need a collective mechanism for setting where that bar is and how we adjust it. And I think there's a very strong case for it to be a high bar, but an objective bar, transparent, everyone understands how it's set, and there's a clear way to become one of us. And the main benefit of that is not for the people who want to become one of us. It's a benefit. The main benefit is for those of us who are already Jewish and want some canon of knowledge, some sense of a legacy. What exactly am I leaving? You know, I don't know if my brothers ever asked that question. I'm pretty sure they didn't before. What exactly am I leaving? What is it that I'm denying to my children when I choose this path in life? If that were a readily answerable question, I think a lot of us would say, no, I actually want to preserve that. We're not posing the question. That's what this book is.
Mm-hmm. So much of what you say resonates with me. I still want to give you a reaction to the intermarriage issue, and then I want you to comment on it. The Jewish tradition has always welcomed sincere converts. And the model is Ruth. And what's interesting about Ruth is when you started by telling me, you know, you're not a person necessarily with faith, the model of Ruth, faith comes last. Whether thou goest, I will go. The rabbis interpret that to be halacha. She lives in. Where you lodge, I will lodge. I will live among the Jewish people. Your people will become my people. So much will she live with us that she begins to identify as, and only then does she say, thy God will be my God. And the rabbis say it comes last. Very often the modern model is to put God first. Mm-hmm. I think it's a Jewish mistake. It's not a Jewish notion, it's a Jewish mistake. Okay. But the Jewish tradition is also worried about Jews who marry, who convert in order to marry. Mm-hmm. And there's this principle in the Talmud and Jewish tradition, you can't convert for an ulterior motive, for a secondary motive. You've got to do it for Torah. Yeah. And then there's this very famous Midrash that says, where Hillel accepts a convert because he wants to become high priest. So first of all, he can't become a priest at all, let alone a high priest. And Hillel accepts him, and his disciples say to him, how could you have done that? And his answer is, by the time he learns he can't be a high priest, he'll love the Torah for its own sake, right. Lishma, therefore it's okay. And I think there's a great deal of truth to that. I think that there are people who convert to Judaism who become the more committed Jew within the family, mm-hmm. who become more knowledgeable. And not only that, very often somebody will say, because I married a non-Jew, I became educated and I became committed. Sure. However, that's not the majority. The majority of people who convert, especially from marriage, is because they love somebody. Mm-hmm. And because there's a parent who makes an issue or a grandparent who makes an issue. And the convert comes with 2 things missing. Number one, all of the memories that you and I understand are critical to shaping Jewish identity. Yeah. They don't have the childlike experience. Right. They were not children in their mother's arms. They were not children around the Shabbat table. They were never at a Seder when they were 6 and 7. They never did the 4 questions when they were the youngest child. They never studied in a Hebrew school and wanted to kill themselves. Mm-hmm. They never became bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah with a ceremony where they had to get up and they were scared to death. And they didn't even know why they were doing it because nobody had the guts, the courage to tell them you're doing it as a gift to your parents. Mm-hmm. The reason a child has a bar bat mitzvah ceremony is it's a gift to their family. They're 13 years old. They're not. Right. We're nuts. Okay. But these converts never had that. Mm-hmm. More than that, the converts have non-Jewish parents. And now, the children of this marriage are going to have at least 2 grandparents for whom Judaism means nothing, and maybe they'll be very lovely people. Very often they're lovely people. They will try very hard to accommodate the choice that their child has made to marry a Jew. But the reality is they have Easter and they have Christmas and they're the grandparents. And they have every right to their grandchild as a Jewish grandparent has a right to their grandchild. And the child will grow up and there'll be Christmas in their life. Okay. Hopefully it'll be at the grandparents' home, not in the home of the parents. But they'll go and they'll have cousins. And so what I think is the honest thing to say is the best thing a Jew can do is marry another Jew. The second best, and I want to underline best, the second best is to marry somebody who converts to Judaism. And I assume that conversion will be honest and enthusiastic. And the third option is to marry somebody who's not a Jew and there is no conversion. But I don't pretend that the second best is as good as the first best, because I want this child to grow up, and everywhere this child looks, I want them to see Jewish grandparents and Jewish cousins and Jewish aunts and uncles, all of whom know what a Seder night is, all who knows what matzah is, all who knows what maror is, even if they hate it, who know what Purim is, even if they haven't they haven't heard the Megillah for years, who went to Hebrew school even though they hated it, who understand that there's something called the Jewish family because they were brought up in it from the moment they were born. And therefore, for me, while yes, I believe the Jewish community should be welcoming of anyone who wants to convert. And in the Jewish tradition, once somebody converts, you're never even permitted to tell them that they were not a Jew. You can't say, I never would have thought you weren't born Jewish. That's not a nice thing to say to a convert. Yeah. The Jewish tradition says the convert is, by the way, in the Jewish tradition, a convert is dearer to God than the homeborn because that person made the choice. Yes. And in the Jewish tradition, what we're really supposed to do, even though we're born Jews, is to make a choice. And every Passover is about making that choice all over again. At the same time, it's hard for me to go as far as you do to say I want to encourage intermarriage. I don't want to encourage intermarriage. I want to embrace the intermarried couple, and I hope that anybody who wants to marry a Jew will stand under a Hopa as a Jew with a Satiric Kedushin who's a rabbi. And then, Tal, I have a bigger problem. I'm a rabbi, and I have congregants who are lovely, wonderful people, who have children who are lovely, wonderful people. And their children grow up, and they fall in love with somebody who isn't Jewish. And for them, they're not going to ask their intended to become Jewish. And then the question every rabbi has now, even Orthodox rabbis, but certainly non-Orthodox rabbis, what do you do when a congregant says to you, you were the rabbi at this child's Breech Mila, baby naming, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. They love you. And they want you to marry them. And nobody, rabbis don't marry anybody. In the Jewish tradition, you marry each other, and the rabbi's the Masada Kedushin. He makes sure you do it properly. But I know what they mean, and you know what they mean. They want their rabbi to be the one who makes it a wedding. And rabbis now are very conflicted. Because more and more are saying there's nothing to be gained by saying no. And then there are others who say at the same time there's an enormous amount to be lost by saying yes. So you've heard my perspective on intermarriage. I want to hear anything you want to say.
Let me ask. Of non-Orthodox Jews who marry in the United States, 28% marry other Jews. That's the number.
Very few marry Jews. You are correct.
28%.
That means 72 don't.
Correct. By the way, to me, the 28 numbers is the interesting one.
In what sense? That there's still 28?
Well, if you were to look into those marriages, how many of them do you think were the result of two people saying, I can only marry a Jew. I'll only date a Jew because I don't want to risk all.
Very few now.
Right. So many of those are arbitrary.
Luck.
You just happen
Just
to
the draw.
Exactly. By the way, I would say almost every secular Jewish marriage in Israel is exactly that. Right? We don't know any non-Jews, so this is who we married. If you had to, in that ranking that you put out, first marry a born Jew, that if the choices were, here's a couple who are both born Jewish, but for whom Judaism doesn't mean very much, and they don't observe Jewish tradition or rituals, there is no Shabbat, there's no Seder.
Yeah.
Versus a Jew marrying a sincere convert, saying, I want this. I understand I don't have this baggage that you have, but I want to try to find as much of it as I can and adopt it because I do want to be part of this. Do you still feel the same way?
First of all, you're choosing the best of one and the worst of another.
Correct.
Not fair.
No, but intentional.
Not fair. Not fair. Not, by the way, it's not worthy of you.
But intentional, no?
No. You choose the best of one with the best of the other. Number two, it comes back to what you said by family. I believe that insight that you have, and which is one I often don't hear instinctively coming out of Jews, is the single most important thing you say in your book and in your presentation and who you are. You remind us all to be a Jew is to be a part of a family. And therefore, even in your example, you have two Jews who are basically secular Jews, and worse than secular. Most Jews, by the way, when you ask them, does being Jewish mean something to you? They will say yes, even if synagogue and Torah does not. Mm-hmm. They never set foot in a synagogue. They eat cheeseburgers on Yom Kippur, but the Jewish people mean something to them. And that's because it's family. So for me, I still put such an important value on the entire context of their children. Everywhere their child looks, there's going to be a Jew. To me, overrides what you the unfair dichotomy you said. Here are two Jews who do nothing, and I've got this fabulous person who's converted to Judaism and loves it, and she's going to be the president of her congregation, and blah blah blah. Her parents are still not Jewish. They've still got kids who are going to go to Christmas, and they have a right to that. I'm not critical of that. And so for me, I am not as sanguine about what it means for there to be a committed non-Jew who's the second best, but second best, to two Jews, even who are not excited about being Jewish, and things can always change for them.
So I think I see where you're coming from on this. The resolution is probably practical in that we can't do anything about it either way, right? People will do what they're going to do. We have freedom now, right? We didn't in the ghetto, we do now. Let's not go back to the ghetto. I think we can make this work. Is it going to be perfect? No. There are going to be competing imperatives along the way. We'll have to negotiate them. It's never going to be perfect. Let's embrace both. I don't know if again, if we could choose, then it would be a practical discussion, but we can't. So why don't we go with the best we can get?
Fair enough. Sometimes when you write a book, you become wedded to every word in it. What impresses me also about you, Tal, is that you've said, this is a book that you wrote at a specific moment in time, and you continue to evolve. Mm-hmm. And it may be that when you write the second version of this book, the second edition of this book, there'll be things in it you change. I give you enormous credit for saying that. I told you, there have been very few people I've wanted to meet, like I wanted to meet you. You are fabulous. You are out of, since you know Hebrew, Yotzei min hakol.
Toda.
And I want you to know you have a home in that chair anytime.
Thank you very much.
Anytime. As long as we've spoken, I'm still not done with you. Good. I'm going to have you back. I want to have you back for panels. You're an important voice now on the Jewish scene. And whether I agree with everything you say or not, I agree with so much of what you do, but I respect every single thing about you. I wish only good things for you. Success with the book. You continue to speak, you continue to teach us, and you continue to come and sit in that chair. Fair enough?
Thank you, Mark.
Tal Keinan, in addition to being a leading figure in Israeli finance, we didn't talk about that. He's the author of an important, and again, I say it's a spellbinding book, dealing with the challenges and potential of the Jewish future. It's entitled, God is in the Crowd. And there's so much I didn't get to talk to him about. He spent so much time here still, so there's much to do. We will do more in the future. It's published by Random House. Of course, it's available in bookstores and through Amazon. Do yourself a favor and pick up Tal's book. There are a few things at the moment that you will find as important reading, especially if you care about Israel and you care about being Jewish. God in the Crowd, Tal Keinan. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the many things you heard on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. By the way, L'Chaim is now on podcast. So if you want to hear this again and you're driving in a car or you're somewhere without a TV, you can hear Tal anytime you want. Just go to iTunes and listen to the L'Chaim podcast. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.